Welcome to my cooking show. I'm Gaye and I'm going to teach you how to make bagels. All right, the first thing that we're going to do is add our dry ingredients together. I have here 3 tablespoons of sugar, 2 packages of yeast, and 1 package is equal to 1.5 teaspoons of yeast. So I have 3 teaspoons of yeast. And I have 1 tablespoon of salt. Now, one of the tricks of cooking with yeast is that you have to get your water just the right temperature. It can't be too hot or else it will kill your yeast. And if it's too cold, then it doesn't activate the yeast. So you should be able to put your finger in and feel it and not feel a burn in any way. Sometimes you can zap it in the microwave if it's a little too cold, but only do tiny portions at a time. So then we're going to add our water, and I'm going to turn the machine on to keep it moving so that the warm water doesn't go directly on the yeast. There we go. Now, you can let it just sit if you want. If you're not using a kitchen mixer, then my recommendation is to let the yeast proof. If you are using a mixer, it will automatically start activating and mixing and doing what you need it to do. So, what I'm going to do now is start adding the flour. Okay, the recipe originally calls for 5 to 6 cups of flour. So here I've used maybe about 4.5. So this is the critical part to try and get it the right texture. The longer you knead the bread, the better. And when it's done kneading, then I'll show you specifically how to tell what texture you want. The longer you knead it, it loosens up just a little bit too. So I'll show you. Okay, so here I've taken my dough out of the mixer, and to kind of help you see, it's very, very pliable, but it's not sticky to my hands, and yet it's still firm. It's going to hold its shape. So this is ideal. This is perfect for bagels. Okay, at this point, you can let the dough raise a little bit, let it rest, give it about 30 minutes. And then what you're going to do is start shaping it into bagel shapes. The way that I have found the easiest to do is to kind of make a hole with your hand here and push it through, and that's going to give you a nice flat round type shape. And then you're going to kind of pinch it off at the bottom and tuck that underneath. And then what you need to do is make your hole. Now, a bagel will raise a lot from this stage. So you want to make sure that you make a pretty big hole so that the water can go all the way through. Yes, I said water. That's the secret to bagels. Bagels are boiled, but then they're baked afterward. So you're going to see some pretty funny stuff. So anyway, I'm going to make a pretty big hole there, and then I am going to let it rise on the cookie sheet and just let it sit for a while, probably about another 30 minutes, and then we are going to boil our bagels. So here is a good look at after I shaped my bagels and put them on, and then I will show you what they look like after 30 minutes of raising. And here they are 30 minutes later. As you notice, it's not a huge amount of rising like you would for bread because it's a firmer dough, but it is rising a little bit. Also, when you put the bagel in the water, it will continue to rise, and when you bake, it'll do more. So they're definitely not done yet, but here we go. Okay, what we have now is a nice rolling boil. You want to make sure it's a rolling boil because when you put them in, it's going to cool the water down, but you want it to be boiling. So we're going to place our first bagel in there, and they will usually go all the way to the bottom, and then as they cook, it starts to raise, and they're going to start coming up a little bit, and they'll start floating around. There we go. And sometimes they will stick to the bottom a little bit, so I take the spatula and just kind of put it underneath if it doesn't rise up on its own. And I'm going to let it, well, just sit there maybe 30 seconds, and then I'm going to turn it over. This is going to make your bagels very wrinkly, and they're going to look really, really ugly, but it's the oven that makes them look normal and beautiful, stretched out, nice and brown. But this is what gives the chewy texture to the bagel, is by boiling it. I'm going to turn it back over so that I can just scoop them up and put them right back on the pan. Be careful because they get really slippery because they're wet. Okay, I'm going to do this with all of my bagels, and as soon as they're all boiled, then they are ready to go in the oven. Now remember that the bagels are basically half baked, so you need to adjust your oven a little bit. If you notice here, I've taken this top rack and I moved it up one, so it's not down below in the middle of the oven. It's up one, so it's a little closer to the top. Make sure you preheat your oven to 475, and make sure that the pan that you use is a non-stick surface. This one that I use is actually a silicone pad, and so I don't have to spray it or anything. If you're just using a regular cookie sheet, you'll want to spray it with Pam, or use foil and spray it with Pam, and some people like to add a little bit of cornmeal on the bottom or something to make it a little fancy. Okay, now you need to remember that these are pretty much half cooked. So by moving that rack up, it'll make it so it doesn't get too dark on the bottom, and it'll make it a nice brown on top. Okay, we're going to leave them in the oven for about 10 or 15 minutes, and you want them just a nice brown on top. You don't want them too light or else they'll wrinkle, so maybe a little on the darker side of brown. All right, I think our bagels are ready. This is the fun part when they come out of the oven. As you can see, they're kind of a dark brown. You want that or else they're going to turn out like prunes because there's so much moisture inside the bagel. Now I need to let them cool long enough to be able to handle them. This is just about the right color that you want it on the bottom. Any more than that, then it gets really tough and they almost taste burnt. So, perfect. I can take them off the pan and put them on this cooling rack, and they'll be able to cool off a little faster. All right, I think we're ready to finally prepare our bagel. I'm going to use a serrated knife to cut the bagel, and just cup it in your hand, and then you're going to cut it open in half. And what I have here is just plain cream cheese. This one, I just whipped it and got it soft. This one here, I added some jalapenos to. And if you've got a plain bagel, you can make all kinds of toppings. But you can also make a lot of flavored bagels. I make cinnamon and raisin. You add just a little more sugar, and then you add the raisins before your dough gets real firm. You're gonna maybe half the flour and then add the raisins if you do that. I've done berries, I've done jalapeno bagels, all kinds of stuff. It's a great chance to be creative. So now we're gonna put some of our cream cheese on here. And I don't do the jalapeno because I don't do the hot stuff. That's my husband and my daughter. They do the hot stuff. And now this is the best taste in the world. It is a nice, fresh, warm bagel with cream cheese. Wonderful. Happy cooking.